A high-value woman understands that it is not her job nor her purpose to save someone from their own chaos. She recognizes that toxic behavior often stems from deeply rooted issues, trauma, and patterns that the other person is either unwilling or unready to confront. And while she may feel empathy, she no longer confuses empathy with responsibility. She no longer carries the emotional weight for someone else's lack of growth. There might have been a time when she believed that if she loved them harder, gave more, stayed longer, or forgave quicker, they would change. But experience taught her that you cannot change someone who benefits from staying the same. You cannot teach respect to someone who profits from your silence. And so she stopped trying. She knows that pouring herself into someone who refuses to be accountable will only leave her drained, resentful, and disconnected from her own needs. So she chooses to love from a distance, if at all. She steps back without making a scene. She reclaims her energy without offering explanations. She stops fixing because she finally realizes some people don't want to heal. They want company in their dysfunction, and she refuses to be that company. She has learned that her love is not a bandage. Her time is not therapy. Her presence is not a cure. People who are committed to their own toxicity will always twist your kindness into permission, and she refuses to be manipulated by that cycle. So instead of giving them more of herself, she gives them space to be who they are, far away from the life she is intentionally building. A high-value woman knows that she does not need to raise her voice to be heard. She does not need to engage in arguments to prove her worth. Instead, she practices the quiet art of boundaries, clear, calm, and consistent. She understands that a boundary is not a threat or an ultimatum, but a declaration of self-respect. It is how she teaches others to treat her, not through confrontation, but through unwavering clarity about what she will and will not allow. She no longer wastes time trying to convince people to respect her. Instead, she respects herself enough to draw a line and mean it. When someone pushes her limits, she doesn't get loud, she gets firm. When someone tries to guilt trip her for saying no, she doesn't explain herself into exhaustion, she lets her no be enough. Because she understands that people who are used to taking advantage will always resist boundaries. They will call her cold, selfish, or difficult. But she doesn't take the bait because she knows who she is. Her boundary might be silence, it might be distance, it might be choosing not to engage in toxic conversations or refusing to justify her feelings to someone who constantly invalidates them. She does not need to participate in every argument she is invited to. Not every situation demands her energy, and not every person deserves her access. She has learned that boundaries aren't a form of control, they're a form of freedom. They free her from emotional chaos, from manipulation, from being dragged into battles that go nowhere. Instead of fighting for respect, she walks in it. She doesn't fight for a seat at tables where her presence is questioned. She builds her own table and chooses who gets to sit beside her. A high-value woman knows the cost of constantly trying to be everything to everyone. She remembers the days when she said yes while her soul screamed no, when she overextended herself just to avoid conflict, when her worth felt tied to how agreeable or accommodating she could be. She was the peacemaker, the fixer, the one who absorbed tension to keep everyone else comfortable, even if it meant abandoning her own needs in the process. But she outgrew that version of herself, not because it didn't serve others, but because it stopped serving her. She realized that people-pleasing was never about kindness, it was about fear. Fear of being disliked, fear of rejection, fear of being seen as selfish. She began to understand that sacrificing her peace to avoid disappointing others was a slow form of self-betrayal. Every time she prioritized someone else's comfort over her own well-being, she chipped away at the trust she had in herself. So now she protects her peace like it's sacred because it is. She no longer apologizes for needing rest. She no longer stretches herself thin to be easy to deal with. She doesn't say yes out of guilt, and she doesn't stay silent to keep the peace when the silence is costing her too much. She's willing to disappoint others if it means being true to herself. She's okay with not being liked by everyone because she no longer needs external validation to feel worthy. She knows that her peace is not up for negotiation. It is not a reward she gives away to those who approve of her. It is a non-negotiable foundation for the life she's building. She creates space between herself and those who drain her, even if it means facing judgment or misunderstanding. Because while people-pleasing may have once earned her temporary acceptance, it never gave her lasting joy. Peace, on the other hand, is where she meets herself fully without the noise, without the pressure, without the mask. A high-value woman no longer allows herself to be lulled into comfort by pretty words and empty intentions. She has heard too many apologies without change, too many sweet nothings that led to absolutely nothing. She knows that anyone can say the right thing when they're trying not to lose you, but not everyone can consistently do the right thing when they think you'll stay no matter what. She used to give the benefit of the doubt too freely. She believed that I'll do better next time without ever asking why it didn't happen this time. She accepted potential over proof, believing that love meant patience, and patience meant waiting for someone to become who they kept saying they were. But with time and pain, she learned that promises don't build trust, patterns do. So now she pays attention, not just to what people say in moments of guilt or desperation, but to what they do when no one is watching. She notices the little inconsistencies, the moments when actions and words don't align. She watches how they show up not just when it's convenient, but when it's inconvenient. When they're angry, when they're challenged, when they're not getting their way. Because that's when the truth shows itself. She no longer gives endless chances in the hope that someone will grow into the person they claim to be. She doesn't allow herself to be strung along by promises that never materialize. She knows that if someone wanted to change, they already would have. If they truly respected her, she wouldn't have to beg for the bare minimum. If they valued her presence, they wouldn't take her for granted and expect her loyalty in return. So she watches the pattern, the late replies, the hot and cold affection, the cycle of mistreatment followed by just enough charm to make her second-guess herself. She sees it for what it is now, not confusion, not bad timing, not mixed signals, but a pattern. And patterns don't lie. People might, words might, but patterns never do. A high-value woman knows that leaving isn't always about anger or resentment, it's often about preservation. She's no stranger to the ache of letting go, but she also knows the deeper ache of staying somewhere that erodes her self-worth. She understands that not every connection is meant to last, and not every relationship, whether romantic, platonic, or professional, is worth sacrificing her peace for. There was a time when she clung to people out of fear of being alone, fear of what others might say, fear of looking like the one who gave up. She'd stay long after the conversations turned cold and the energy turned heavy. She'd rationalize mistreatment, tell herself they're just going through something, or that maybe she was asking for too much. But now she sees things differently. She understands that staying too long in the wrong spaces can cost her more than walking away ever will. She no longer waits for closure that will never come. She doesn't wait for a dramatic ending to justify her exit. Sometimes people don't break you with betrayal. They just drain you with inconsistency, with indifference, with their inability to match the love, effort, or energy you bring. And when that happens, she doesn't make it her job to fix it. She doesn't beg for respect. She doesn't try to change someone who benefits from keeping her uncertain. When her boundaries are crossed repeatedly, when her needs are minimized, when her presence is taken for granted, she chooses herself. Not in a loud, dramatic way, but in a quiet, firm decision that whatever this is no longer aligns with the life she's creating. And when she leaves, she doesn't drown in guilt. She knows the difference between selfishness and self-respect. She has stopped equating love with endurance. She understands that some people only appreciate you in pieces when you're giving, when you're bending, when you're smaller than your full self, and she refuses to shrink for anyone. She has learned to trust the feeling in her gut, the one that whispers you're giving too much and receiving too little. She doesn't silence that voice anymore. She honors it. She protects herself not because she's cold, but because she's finally warmed to her own needs. She lets people go who don't know how to stay, and she walks away from places that require her to abandon her truth just to belong. A high-value woman sees things for what they are, not what she wishes they would be. She's done romanticizing red flags, done justifying pain as passion, done pretending that mistreatment is something she just has to endure to be understood. She doesn't dress up disrespect with words like he's just stressed, or she had a rough childhood, or they didn't mean it. She knows better now because she's lived through the confusion that comes from constantly giving others the benefit of the doubt while leaving herself with none. She used to explain away cruelty, minimizing it so she wouldn't have to confront the deeper truth. that someone she cared about was choosing not to care for her in return. It's a hard thing to admit that someone is hurting you, not by accident, but by habit. That someone continues to ignore your boundaries, not because they're unaware, because they've learned you'll tolerate it. She's been there. She's made excuses to friends, to family, even to herself, trying to hold together the idea of who someone could be instead of holding them accountable for who they are. But not anymore. Now, she holds people accountable with grace, but with firmness. She no longer explains away emotional negligence, inconsistency, or manipulation. She no longer allows apologies to become a substitute for actual change. She doesn't call gaslighting miscommunication. She doesn't reframe cruelty as a bad day. She understands that empathy has a limit, and that limit is reached when it starts asking her to betray her own reality. She's no longer interested in protecting the image of someone who keeps proving who they really are. When the words and actions don't align, she believes the actions. When someone repeatedly shows her they don't value her, she stops looking for deeper meaning and starts making decisions rooted in self-respect. She doesn't need to diagnose someone's behavior to justify keeping them in her life. She doesn't need to know why they are the way they are in order to say, this is not okay with me. She refuses to let love become a loophole for harm. She no longer clings to someone's potential while her spirit withers in the present. She knows that healing and accountability are two different things, and while she may hope someone finds healing, she won't let that hope cost her her peace, her dignity, or her voice. So when faced with bad behavior, she doesn't rationalize it. She names it. She refuses to water down the truth just to keep a connection alive that's already built on shaky ground. She no longer saves people from the consequences of their own actions. She saves herself. A high-value woman is not defined by how much she can tolerate, but by how deeply she honors herself. She has learned that protecting her peace isn't selfish, it's essential. She doesn't stay where she is not respected, she doesn't shrink to make others comfortable, and she doesn't entertain chaos just to feel needed. Her strength is not in how loud she is, but in how quietly she refuses to be mistreated. She moves with grace, but she carries boundaries like armor. She listens, she watches, she feels, but above all, she chooses herself every single time because she knows her worth and she no longer accepts connections that make her question it. A high-value woman does not arrive at her strength by accident. She earns it through experiences that broke her open, through moments where silence taught her more than words ever could, and through choices that required her to disappoint others. She could finally stop disappointing herself. She used to think love meant staying, fixing, giving more, proving herself. She used to confuse loyalty with self-abandonment. But now she understands you cannot carry someone else's healing on your back and call it compassion. You cannot bleed emotionally just to keep someone else comfortable and call it love. She has stepped out of the illusion that her worth is determined by how much she can endure. Her worth is not up for debate, negotiation, or delay. It is in how she holds herself when no one is watching, in how she walks away when no one is clapping, in how she refuses to justify someone's harmful behavior just to keep the peace. She sees clearly now that people can only meet you as deeply as they've met themselves, that someone's promises are just noise unless they're followed by consistent actions, that a pattern is the truth even when the words are wrapped in sweetness. She has learned to stop waiting for potential and start choosing reality. She no longer fights battles that steal her joy. She doesn't throw her energy at people who only show up halfway. She protects her peace, her time, her energy, not out of fear, but because she finally knows what it took to earn it. She builds her boundaries not as walls, but as bridges to better things. She moves in silence, not because she's hiding, but because her power no longer needs an audience to be real. This woman has walked through fire and came out with calm. She has cried in silence and rose with clarity. She has let go of people who once felt like home, only to build a home within herself. She chooses herself, not in spite of others, but because it is the only way to truly love, lead, and live with purpose. She is not cold, she is clear. She is not angry, she is awake. She is ruthless, she is rooted. And because of that, no toxic person, no manipulative energy, no conditional love can reach her anymore. Not because she fights it, but because she's risen above it. She is no longer available for conversations that drain her. She no longer entertains confusion as a lifestyle. If someone cannot show up with honesty, respect, and consistency, she doesn't argue, she exits. Not with rage, not with dramatic goodbyes, but with the quiet power of a woman who refuses to beg for the bare minimum. Her silence is no longer weakness, it's wisdom. Her distance is not indifference, it's discernment. She has learned that not everyone deserves access to her heart, her time, or her presence. And so she no longer opens doors for people who only know how to take. She guards her space like a sanctuary because it took too many tears, too many rebuilds, too many moments of feeling unseen to get here. There was a time she would have explained herself over and over just to be understood. Now, she understands herself so deeply that explanation is no longer necessary. She knows that alignment is quiet. She doesn't chase, she tracks. She doesn't force, she flows. She doesn't cling, she releases. And in that stillness, she becomes a mirror. Not everyone can handle that. Some people will try to shake her confidence, test her boundaries, or accuse her of being too much or too little. But she no longer folds under guilt or shrinks under pressure. She stands tall in her truth, even if it means standing alone. Because a high-value woman isn't trying to be chosen, she's choosing herself over and over again. She's not waiting for someone to finally see her. She sees herself fully, finally, fiercely. And that is where her power lies. She is no longer available for conversations that drain her. She no longer entertains confusion as a lifestyle. If someone cannot show up with honesty, respect, and consistency, she doesn't argue, she exits. Not with rage, not with dramatic goodbyes, but with the quiet power of a woman who refuses to beg for the bare minimum. Her silence is no longer weakness, it's wisdom. Her distance is not indifference, it's discernment. She has learned that not everyone deserves access to her heart, her time, or her presence. And so she no longer opens doors for people who only know how to take. She guards her space like a sanctuary because it took too many tears, too many rebuilds, too many rebels, feeling unseen.